I am willing to guess that most people would love to witness a miracle, to have a miracle happen in their life or in the life of someone they love, to see a miracle take place. A miracle, by definition, is something that is instantaneous, long lasting, and defies explanation. I can tell you that miracles still happen today. Because in the causes of saints, for someone to be advanced, to be a blessed, or to be a saint, a miracle has to take place. People have to ask that holy person to pray and to pray for the grace of a miracle, a healing, or whatever. So, because we beatify individuals and because we canonize them, I tell you, miracles still happen today. Our gospel for Corpus Christi today is that of a biblical miracle. It's Jesus blessing the loaves of bread and the fish, having them distributed and feeding thousands of people. And there are two classes of people at this miracle. The first class are individuals who have no idea that something miraculous is taking place. They are just receiving the bread, the morsel of bread, and the piece of fish, and they're eating it because they're hungry. They don't realize that they only had 5 loaves and 2 fish, and they're feeding all of these people with that. And the second class of people you have are the apostles, the disciples, who are passing out the morsels of bread and the bits of fish. Because as they're going, and they know the origin, they know that there's only 5 loaves and 2 fish. And as they're sharing, as they're giving it out, surely they become in awe that it's not emptying, that they're able to get to the very last person and have just enough for that person. A miracle. We want to witness a miracle, maybe of biblical proportion or a miracle in our own life or in the people that we love. But what if I told you that I would like to suggest that every time we go to Mass, that's a miracle? It's the miracle of the bread and the wine and the technical theological language of the church being transubstantiated into the body and blood of Jesus Christ. That's a miracle. That bread and wine, and that which looks like bread and wine and tastes like bread and wine, is really the body, blood, soul, and divinity of the Lord. That's the miracle of the Mass. But really, if you think about everything around the Mass, there is several different mini miracles. Doesn't meet the definition of instantaneous, long-lasting, beyond explanation, but little miracles of God's grace surrounding the Mass. For example, I think the priesthood, that the priest is a miracle. I don't say that just because I'm a priest. But if you think about the fact that a young person, a young man like myself back many years ago, had to hear God's call, had to live their life in the world, and that they didn't allow outside influences or exertions on them to distract them, to persuade them away, to discourage their vocation to the priesthood. That a vocation is heard and responded, that it is preserved and persevered in, I think that's a miracle. I look at my life and I say, what a miracle, what a grace of God, that an individual who came from a broken family, a fatherless home, a home in which faith really wasn't practiced, but my grandmother was devout. And that through all of that, I was able to hear God's call to be a priest. That I became captivated by the Blessed Virgin. That I thought maybe God was calling me to serve him in the church. I think that's a miracle. And I think every Sunday when I stand before the people of God, as I proclaim the word and preach his word, as I celebrate the Eucharist, all of you are a miracle. That it's a miracle that regardless of what you were doing on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning, that you heard God's call to come to Mass, that you dropped everything and that you came. You know, one of the things I love at 7:30 Mass this morning, there were 3 people of a family, and the young girl, a softball player, had a Mustangs jersey on. Her father had a Mustangs polo on. But surely they were participating in a softball tournament. And what a miracle that they said, I'm going to Sacred Heart at 7:30 for Mass. The fact that all of you go to Mass week in and week out, day in and day out, it's a little miracle of God. And like I said, the miracle of the bread and wine. St. Paul, in our second reading today, he speaks about the Last Supper. Now, St. Paul is a miracle himself because St. Paul was a persecutor of Christians. He was on the road to Damascus, on the way to persecute Christians, and the risen Christ appears to him and says, why are you persecuting me? And Saul, who becomes Paul, leaves that behind and becomes a Christian. And what he writes today, what I hand on to you, I have received. He's not like Matthew. He's not like John. He hasn't seen the Last Supper, but he's participated. Do this in remembrance of me. And he tells the story in our letter today that on the night of the Last Supper, Jesus took bread and blessed it and broke it and said, this is my body, and a chalice saying, this is my blood. He recounts that for us. And that's the miracle of the Mass, that the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ comes on the altar, is reserved in our tabernacle, is received by you and me at Mass. The celebration of Corpus Christi is a celebration of a miracle, actually. As the story goes, a priest named Father Peter of Prague was going on a pilgrimage to Rome. And he left his parish and he was on his way to Rome, and he stops at a little church. Probably was a bigger church, I don't know. And St. Christina is buried there, or had the relics of St. Christina. And Father Peter of Prague is going to celebrate Mass. Now, Father Peter was struggling a little bit. He saw the immorality around him, people living immoral lives. He described the clergy of his time as lazy. He talked about a lack of reverence for the sacred. And those 3 things were contributing to a crisis of faith for him. And as Father Peter of Prague goes to the altar and celebrates the Mass, and as he takes the host and he says, this is my body given up for you, and elevates the host, which is bread, literally turns into flesh. And drops of blood come down from this host that's been consecrated. The drops of blood fall onto the corporal. And Father Peter tells everybody in the congregation what just happened. This is in the year 1263. Father Peter knows that Pope Urban is at a nearby city in Orvieto. And so Father Peter takes the corporal, takes the host, and goes to Orvieto, shows the Holy Father, tells the Holy Father the story of what has happened. And Pope Urban, in 1264, a year later, instituted the Feast of Corpus Christi. St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Bonaventure wrote different Eucharistic hymns for this feast day. 1 year after the miracle of Orvieto, and today you could go to the village of Orvieto and you can adore the corporal that contained the drops of blood and the host that became the flesh. That Eucharistic miracle is still there. And we can honor and remember and venerate that spot. miracles. We want to witness a miracle, and at Mass, we see a miracle. Miracles happen every day. The miracle of the Mass began at the Last Supper when Jesus took the bread and when he took the chalice. And that miracle of the multiplication was foreshadowing the Eucharist and the Mass. And so that miracle of the Mass has continued throughout the centuries. Different saints and priests have offered the Mass. And then Father Peter of Prague, his great miracle, and onward from there to this day. In the parishes that I serve, Sacred Heart in Shawano and St. Martin in Cecil, that miracle of Jesus continues as he comes to the altar, as he stays in the tabernacle, as we receive him. Believe in the miracle of the Mass.